What is the purpose of Act 1?
Well, Act 1 gives us all of the context that we need in order to understand the story that we're about to watch, and understand, it basically sets up the who wants what of your movie. So, if we look at each movie as being a story of someone wants something, wants it badly, goes after it against big conflict, great opposition, then Act 1 sets up all of those pieces, right? So it tells us who, it tells us what they want, it tells us why they want it, and it tells us what they're up against. So all of those pieces that sort of create the foundation of the story, or that story engine that we were talking about earlier, that's what Act 1 does. It sets up all of those things so that when we launch into Act 2, or that Act 2 adventure you might have heard it called, when we begin that, we have all of the information that we need in order to understand who are we watching, what are they trying to do, what are they up against, why do they want it so badly? All of that's been established so that we can just watch everything escalate in Act 2. Does that make sense?
It does. And so as we talked about earlier, a lot of people have a great idea and maybe the Act 1 is really strong, but then subsequent acts seems like it's very murky, and that's where the outline would help them.
Yeah, and I think just knowing that, Act 1 is sort of set up, it's where you set up all of that context, and then understanding that Act 2 is escalation. So you have all those pieces in place in Act 1, and then Act 2 is just playing with them and sort of forcing them to butt up against each other and create, bigger and bigger conflicts and higher stakes. That's where that's the fun of Act 2, is watching how everything that you've set up in Act 1, watching how that blossoms now, or explodes.
What mistakes do writers often make in Act 1?
Well, I think the probably, big bucket, maybe a lot of different things fall into this, but the main thing is not setting up all of the context that we need, right? So not clearly establishing those foundation pieces of the story, those main elements that we need to understand and appreciate Act 2. So it's the protagonist, it's their story goal, it's where the conflict is coming from, that main conflict or the antagonist, and it's the main thing that's at stake for the protagonist, right? So all of those pieces have to be in place in Act 1, and when they're not properly established, I think that's the most common kind of mistake that writers make in Act 1.
What mistakes do writers make in Act 2?
Oh, Act 2 is so wide open, right? It's the escalation of your story, and it's watching the thing that you've set up. It's watching it play out, but it can go in so many different directions, right? I think maybe if I had to name one thing, probably the biggest mistake would be, no, I have to do two. So the first one is not having their protagonist pursue the goal consistently and urgently, right? Because that's really what moves your story forward, is the protagonist trying to achieve that thing. So that's a big one. And then I would say maybe the other big one, and this is kind of connected, is not escalating things. So sort of hitting the same note over and over, not intensifying the conflict, not raising the stakes, because we want things to grow, right? We want the conflict to sort of double back on itself and compound, and things to get harder and more intense, and to feel more important and more urgent for the protagonist. That's, the progression of Act 2 should have that sort of building feeling to it. And so I think that's probably the other big one, is maybe hitting the same intensity level, or reworking the same conflict without making things harder or making things more important or urgent. Yeah.
That was the great thing about Hustle, is that so many new things came up. Without spoiling it for those who haven't seen it, once you got through one hurdle, a new one was presented.
Yeah.
And it's really not even until the end where, you're like, this can't end this way. But anyway.
Yeah, and that was, they did such a good job of having conflict come from so many different directions too, right? It wasn't just that this is a difficult thing to achieve, and so it's, Adam Sandler trying to get the basketball player in shape or, ready to compete at this level. You had other players with their own agendas. You had, you know, like we talked about, the owner has his own agenda, you know, things going wrong. So you had conflict coming from all these different directions, which is great because, again, growing the intensity across Act 2, right? That's what keeps you sort of like leaning in over and over again, going like, oh no, what's going to happen now? What could possibly go worse for this character? And that keeps you kind of like reinvesting in the outcome. I don't know if you've seen, did you watch the series Made?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Love it. Yes.
So that is such a good example. Just even the first episode of that series is such a good example of conflict and building conflict and nothing going right for the protagonist. Like, you know, one of the comments I think that writers hear a lot is like, things are too easy for your protagonist, or, you know, you need to increase the conflict or make things hard, put your character through hell, right? Like those are all kind of tidbits of advice that writers hear. But I feel like, you know, writers like their characters sometimes and don't want to make things too hard, or don't see a way for the character to get through it if they make things too hard. But that first episode of Made was such a good example of like nothing went right for that character. Every single thing went wrong, and she still, you know, I mean, that's kind of the point, is like that makes us root for her even more because everything's stacked against her, and we're on board. We're watching. We want her to succeed. So I don't think you can ever make things too hard for your protagonist.
Right, and that was one of the things in listening to the audiobook that it was based on. It was so, like, I felt so bad for this woman and hearing it. And then I guess it was just easier for me to watch it sort of play out. And I don't know, it was still difficult. But yes, I mean, it was so many different things being set up. I don't want to give that away, but I absolutely love that.
Yeah, I think that's a great one for writers to watch. If you've ever gotten the note of like, you're not making things hard enough on your character, you know, watch that and see just how hard you can be on your character without breaking them, you know, because I think maybe that's what scares writers, is like, if I make things too hard, I won't be able to figure out how they're going to keep going, or I won't be able to figure out kind of like how to get them through it. But that, you know, dialing up that intensity is good. It's good for your story, and that's kind of what your audience wants, you know?
Sure, and she would have these meltdowns, and then she would kind of get back on the horse, and then new things would happen.
Yeah, and we like her more for that, too, for not giving up, you know? So
right, yeah, she was very likable as a character. What is the purpose of Act 3?
Well, Act 3 is to resolve that question that you've asked, or that main conflict that you've sort of put your character into. So it's to resolve the question that we've been exploring over the course of the movie, right? When you set up all those pieces that we talked about in Act 1, all of the foundation pieces of your story, and then we watch them play out across Act 2. Act 3 is where you answer that central dramatic question, wrap up your story, resolve that conflict, if you want to think of it that way. It's basically the resolution act. That's, you know, you've done all the escalations, and there will still be some escalations in Act 3, but it's building toward resolving your main conflict and answering that central dramatic question.
What mistakes do writers make most often in Act 3?
Well, I think the big one, maybe the most obvious one, would be just not resolving that, you know, central dramatic question, or that main conflict that we're watching the movie to understand how that's going to wrap up. And so I think not resolving that is maybe the biggest or the most common sort of like newer writer mistake. Sometimes newer writers, you know, again, out of fear maybe that their story is getting boring, or they don't know how to escalate it and don't know where to go from here, they take a left turn and start tracking a different question or a different conflict that their protagonist engages in. And we really want Act 3 to sort of like complete that through line, not take such a hard left that we're now watching a different movie, you know?
And is that often when we, you know, sort of see comments underneath a trailer, oh, the trailer is better than the movie? Is it often the Act 3, do you think, or Act 2, or there's no hard and fast rule?
Yeah, I wonder. I don't know for sure, but I would guess that maybe A really good trailer was cut from a movie that didn't have as much going on in Act 2 and probably Act 3 as well. But since Act 2 is really kind of like the movie, you know, that's what the movie is. It's the character trying to do this thing, it's conflict escalating, it's stakes raising. That's really the, you know, Act 2, and that is the movie that we're there to see. So I would imagine if a trailer or if a movie is getting those comments of like the trailer was so much better than the movie, the good, interesting, or entertaining moments were cut into the trailer, and maybe there just wasn't enough going on in the movie to sustain interest or, you know, to maintain our investment in the outcome of it.